Now listen, all you airmen, young and old, to the tales of fighter pilots, young and bold, with their fighters painted yellow, leaping off the contact mellow in the crisp Korean air so blue and cold. It was dive bomb Olsen and you stopped the Reds, 8 1,000-pounders loaded Denson heads. 4 birds lined up on the runway. Wish I'd gone to church on Sunday. Hope we catch those lousy commies in their beds. 20,000 over Pyongyang, all northwest. Gas mask flight about to face the acid test. Till at last the Yalu River, which makes my liver quiver, with flak guns lined up 24 abreast. Dust clouds roll up from Antung across the way. 20 swept-winged Chinese warbirds out to play. 37s, 23s, all lit up like Christmas trees. Salvo off the tip tanks, leaping to the fray. Gempo Tower clears the pattern with great haste. 20 victory rolls our pilots do with grace. It was thrilling, it was hairy, near that privileged sanctuary. Singman Rhee will soon be boss of this whole place. Gempo Tower, this is Gas Mask Willie Ford. I am heading home, I'm through with this damn war. I am flying on the K2, heading 150 for Taegu, 'cause they're sending back to Moscow for some more. Up over the target and flat on my back, alone and scared shitless, surrounded by flak. There's MiGs on my ass and my burner won't light. Got hung bombs and rockets, but I'll stay and fight. Does anybody read Fireball? I'm bingo for crying out loud. Please keep me out of the weather, I'm no good at flying in clouds. I came here from Seymour 13 months ago. Why MPC did this to me, I don't know. I came in the Air Force 'cause I want to fly. Now I want my mama, I don't want to die. Does anybody read Fireball? The sun's almost down out of sight. GCA, can you hear me? I'm no good at flying at night. Last time I got shot at was 72. My flight leader always told me what to do. But combat is different now, here's how it's done. It's 1v1, v1, v1, v1. Does anybody read Fireball? The airlines are hiring, I hear. Guess I'll take United's offer, a brave DC-10 engineer.
Well, grab your gun and grab your gear. We're on the double, march to the rear. We're moving on, we're moving on. MacArthur's men move back again. We're moving on. Old Singman Rhee was setting his soul, saying, come on boys, we gotta bury our gold. We're moving on, we're moving on. We're moving on to old Chung Shon. We're moving on. Well, we gave him shot and we gave him shell and we drove him north of parallel. We're moving on, we're moving on. We're on the run to hell and gone. We're moving on. Holy smoke, they're coming down the pass, spraying a burp gun right at my ass. I'm moving on, I'm moving on. This little GI is flying high. I'm moving on. Hey, here comes Joe Son down the track. GI baby strapped on her back. She's moving on, she's moving on. She's looking for Papa San, we are moving on. What's the matter, you mad at me? All 'cause I give you VD, we're moving on. We're moving on. Her little honey bucket in the middle of the road, she's moving on. So when you hear the patter of a tiny feet, that's the U.S. Army in a full retreat. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're burning gas, we're hauling ass, we're moving on.
Now listen, all you airmen, young and old, to the tales of fighter pilots, young and bold, with their fighters painted yellow, leaping off the contact mellow in the crisp Korean air so blue and cold. It was dive bomb Olsen and you stopped the Reds, 8 1,000-pounders loaded Denson heads. 4 birds lined up on the runway. Wish I'd gone to church on Sunday. Hope we catch those lousy commies in their beds. 20,000 over Pyongyang all northwest. Gas mask flight about to face the acid test. Till at last the Yalu River, which makes my liver quiver, with flak guns lined up 24 abreast. Dust clouds roll up from Antung across the way. 20 swept-winged Chinese warbirds out to play. 37s, 23s, all lit up like Christmas trees. Salvo off the tip tanks, leap into the fray. Gempo Tower clears the pattern with great haste. 20 victory rolls our pilots do with grace. It was thrilling, it was hairy, near that privileged sanctuary. Singman Rhee will soon be boss of this whole place. Gempo Tower, this is Gas Mask Willie 4. I am heading home, I'm through with this damn war. I am flying on to K2, heading 150 for Taegu, 'cause they're sending back to Moscow for some more. Up over the target and flat on my back, alone and scared shitless, surrounded by flak. There's MiGs on my ass and my burner won't light. Got hung bombs and rockets, but I'll stay and fight. Does anybody read Fireball? I'm bingo for crying out loud. Please keep me out of the weather, I'm no good at flying in clouds. I came here from Seymour 13 months ago. Why MPC did this to me, I don't know. I came in the Air Force 'cause I want to fly. Now I want my mama, I don't want to die. Does anybody read Fireball? The sun's almost down out of sight. GCA, can you hear me? I'm no good at flying at night. Last time I got shot at was 72. My flight leader always told me what to do. But combat is different now, here's how it's done. It's 1v1, v1, v1, v1. Does anybody read Fireball? The airlines are hiring, I hear. Guess I'll take United's offer, a brave DC-10 engineer.
Well, grab your gun and grab your gear. We're on the double, march to the rear. We're moving on. We're moving on. MacArthur's men move back again. We're moving on. Old Singman Rhee was setting his soul, saying, "Come on, boys, we gotta bury our gold." We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on to old Chung Shon. We're moving on. Well, we gave him a shot and we gave him a shell and we drove him north of Parallel. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're on the run to hell and gone. We're moving on. Holy smoke, they're coming down the pass, spraying a burp gun right at my ass. I'm moving on. I'm moving on. This little GI is flying high. I'm moving on. Hey, here comes Joe Son down the track. GI baby strapped on her back. She's moving on. she's moving on. She's looking for Papa San. We are moving on. What's the matter? You mad at me? All 'cause I give you VD. We're moving on. We're moving on. Her little honey bucket in the middle of the road, she's moving on. So when you hear the patter of a tiny feet, that's the U.S. Army in a full retreat. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're burning gas, we're hauling ass, we're moving on.
Who was they?
The people who sell the kits. They don't put them together. They sell them. There's only one company that makes them. There's a couple of places that sell them. But
okay, guys, I've got.
Yeah, but they make a kit just for this engine. It's got the belt, the pulleys, the skirt, the bolts, and everything, all in one package.
Okay, we're hot, we're active, we're live. Let me turn the volume down on this. Let's get a voice check real quick. Ken, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Checking. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 13. Whatever, I got lost.
Steve.
2, 4, 6, 8. We are all here and great.
Outstanding.
Oh, yeah.
Well, guys, Steve and I are currently, we're gonna be talking about kit models of Korean War stuff. But before we get started, would you guys please convince Ken that no, you cannot arc weld styrene. Before we get into that, we were discussing a kit model problem. So somebody might have the solution out here. So let's crowdsource this bad boy. Ken, you're working. What is the visible V8?
This is the engine on my boat.
No, wait a minute. Hold on. Wait a minute. I thought we were talking about your model of the car.
Talking about his boat.
This whole time we've been talking about a real engine and not the one. I thought you had gotten the parts from Fran to put the chassis, and the V8 and stuff, and I thought we were talking about a model.
No, he's talking about the motor in his boat and the alternator and the pulleys.
This is what happens when I attend staff meetings. Can you imagine what happens when I skip them?
True.
So okay, well, Ken's having a problem getting what is it, the alternator belt.
Is that an alignment problem?
Basically, I think he got the wrong belt.
Yeah, they give you two of them so that if one breaks, you got the next one. But
I was wondering why you were talking about rust. And I was like, there must be some metal parts to this kit. For some reason, I had, because weren't you supposed to get something from Fran?
Yeah. That's
I
all
did.
separate
I have it.
discussion. That's all separate
Yeah.
discussion.
Weren't we talking about that earlier?
No, we were talking.
We've been talking about a boat motor the whole time. Well, that explains the rust comments.
How much did you have? How much cough syrup did you have?
None. In fact, all I've been drinking is Coke Zero, and I'm out of ice.
Maybe that's the problem.
Maybe I should go dunk. Maybe I should go put some rum in this thing and let you guys carry the show for a minute. You guys take care of this. I'm going to go put some cough syrup in this thing. This is when I can't even keep straight.
The pulley's not bent. It's not bent. Okay.
Way to switch this out.
There's Jim M is asking, bent pulley? Okay. On my boat, I have a small diesel engine that powers the propeller, makes the boat go. And I wanted to get rid of the V-belt that's on there now because it's blowing dust all over the place and it's making a mess. So I bought a serpentine belt kit for it. On this engine, there's only 3 pulleys. There's the crankshaft, there's the water pump, and then there's the alternator. So I took it someplace and had the alternator pulley pulled off because that sucker was on there tight. Had it cleaned up, and they put a bigger bolt in there so the alignment would be correct. So I thought, oh, great, I got everything I need. So I get on the boat, I pull everything apart, and I'm putting things on, and first off, I find out that the bolts that hold on the crankshaft pulley are 3 millimeters too short. So I gotta get new ones of those. I thought, well, I'll just fit the pulley on here because I want to see how, where the alternator sits when I put the belt on. So I go over and get the belt, push the alternator all the way up, and the belt don't fit. It's about 2 inches. The belt is 2 inches too small. So I didn't get a whole lot done today.
So the belt that was on there before, it wasn't a serpentine belt?
No, it was a V-belt.
Okay, so where is the other pulley for the serpentine belt? Like the tensioner?
There's no tensioner. It's old style, where you just push the alternator out, and that tensions the whole belt.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I got enough rum in here now. If I start making mistakes that obvious, I have an excuse.
All right. Now things are going to get interesting.
This is how we roll.
Yeah, no, there's no tensioner on this. There's just the 3 pulleys.
Okay. For some reason, I'm getting all the comments, but they're not advancing.
Garfield says, Max went to get a belt.
That's right.
Sure did.
Which is ironic because I'm wearing the spandexy pants, but this is the belt. So anyway, all right, guys. First off, before we get started, I want to say hi to Steve Jarvis. Apparently, he grabs his grandkids and they come and watch the live stream. And he sent me some pictures of him on his tractor in about 1.5 feet with 2 feet of snow. So
he wants to scar his grandchildren at a young age.
Hey, man, you gotta cut them on the styrene early. Andy Chandler had suggested it's the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima, so we'll be talking a little bit about that at the end. And I want to say hi to Emily and her mom and Ian. I met Ian from Hurricane Hobby's girlfriend today. Very, very sweet, lovely, intelligent girl. And he has done very, very well. So congratulations to Ian, Emily. We wish the best for you. So
make sure he keeps her away from us.
Yeah, that would be recommended. So anyway, since we're doing the Korean War build, I thought we'd talk about Korean War kits or kits of stuff from the Korean War. And I'm working on that F-51D from Tamiya, which is for the Korean build, but it worked right up. And when I started downloading, what?
Sorry.
Anytime you snicker like that, Ken, my spidey sense tingles.
Well, the Mirror Crazy asked what my boat name was, and I told him it was Deep Thought.
Deep Thought.
And he goes, "Oh, cool name."
Should be Deep Pockets. I love that.
Named his boat Deep Pockets.
Absolutely. I that's perfect. Or hole in the pocket, but so I got all kinds of stuff lined up for us. Now, I'm sure everybody watching this already knows, but for those who don't, the Korean conflict went from 1950 to 53. Technically, it's still going today. There never was, technically, we never declared war on North Korea. It was a police action, which, trust me, is what does they say? Something without a difference without a distinction, or distinction without a difference. Bullets are just as deadly in police actions. But North Korea's north and south separated. There was with Chinese backing, the north went into the south and almost beat them. We ran in troops from Japan to help stop them, Task Force Smith, and then the Incheon landed to cut them off and pushed them back up, but MacArthur went too far. He didn't believe the reports of the Chinese sending regulars in. They hit 250,000 men and sprung that on us and pushed us all the way back to the Pusan perimeter. Fought our way back to the 38th. Indian Idell and the guys over at Time Ghost are doing their day-by-day series on it. And my dad served in the Korean War. In fact, he had to stay in the Air Force. He was supposed to get out and marry my mom. I might have an older brother or an older sister beyond the ones, I have older brothers and sisters, but our family might be 8 or 9 kids instead of 7 if, they hadn't.
Are you talking over in Korea or
No,
in the United States?
My dad was going to get out of the Air Force. He was in Alaska, come down here and marry my mom in Florida and go make babies. And that got delayed because he got extended because the war broke out. He was up in Alaska.
Extended. He stayed in Alaska then.
Yeah. The thing is, I think I've got that right. But anyway, I wasn't born yet, so I'm just trying to remember what I was told as a kid. But I always associated the Korean War with my dad's military service. In fact, he went in the Air Force and they still had the brown Ike jackets. We still have his. And my nephew Adam posed for a picture with it, fitting perfectly. And he was in when they got the blue uniforms. And he had corporal stripes in the Army, but when he was in the Air Force, he had sergeant stripes because they do it differently. And I think he was an E4. But anyway, so the Korean War, they call it the forgotten.
Chris Patience says, "Go make babies."
Yeah. It's a complex process, but a lot of fun. So anyway, they call Korea the Forgotten War, but it's not in our family because we always associate it with my dad's military service. But for the average person who is not a military buff, especially if you're too young to remember it, the average person will probably relate the Korean War to the old TV show MASH, which of course takes place during the Korean War. By the way, side note of no great interest to anybody, my ROTC instructor got his Silver Star on Pork Chop Hill. And he was a company commander. And one of the other guys that went up either before or after him wound up getting the Medal of Honor. But Revell made a series, they reboxed their 135th Jeep and added a few accoutrements and made the MASH kit. And Steve, I think you said this wasn't the only one?
And yeah, there was one of the Japanese companies made one with, it had tents and stuff. It kind of built into a playset.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. I didn't find that one. MASH.
KLS and C says his girlfriend built that kit.
Oh, really? Huh. I assume it's the regular Jeep that Revell put out, and they just, added some stuff to it.
HNX Media says the manual reads: insert tab A into slat B, repeat if necessary.
Now, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the movie MASH from which the TV show came. The only actor from the movie to go to the TV show was Gary Berghoff, who played Radar. And the TV show, the movie had a much darker tone to it. Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland. But it was also closer to the book. It's from a book written by a doctor, if I'm not mistaken, and Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. And my understanding is that the TV show had the aesthetic, but according to doctors who served in MASH units, they said a guy like, nobody acted like Hawkeye, walking around in a red robe or anything. They were still in the military, and it wasn't as tight as like an infantry unit, but they saluted and did all the military stuff. It was that's the real criticism of the show is the guys are just a little too glib and cavalier. But other than that, though, it was a very well written, very well thought of show. And it kind of bounced back and forth. It had a sufficient amount of drama in it. And the last episode was really heart wrenching.
My good friend, when I lived in South Jersey, who I'm still friends with his family, his cousin was Klinger.
No, yeah, and that won't get you out on a Section 8. That's a catch-22.
And he would throw a lavish Christmas party every year at his house, and one year he showed up.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, the other thing that people often associate with the Korean War, especially if you're aviation buffs, of course, is the famous jet-on-jet duels of MiGs and Sabres. And the monogram kit on the MiG and the Sabre, from my understanding, are both, this is just a simple reboxing of the existing kits. Everybody and their brother makes the Sabre, and a lot of companies make the MiG-15, so there's no problem getting them in scale. But I built the monogram Sabre and MiG, and they're okay. They're not bad, but if you don't want to build it the way they have it on the box, you really got to grind the parts down if you want to close up the ammo tray and stuff on the Sabre. So I kind of wish they wouldn't do that. But the kit's okay. It's part of the Combat Air Series, which is just an attempt to sell more. Keep it interesting, a 2-for kit. But the kits are okay. I don't know if you guys have built them.
The kit that really gets the short shrift is the Korean kit, is the Panther.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get to that. There's actually quite a few people. Well, NPC makes the Panthers, some other companies, but you got to remember, I think one of the reasons that the Panther doesn't get as much love, although they made several movies about Bridges of Tokori, Men of the Fighting Lady, the one that gets ignored is the Banshee. Which looks like a long, skinny panther, and of course, there's two different. They call them the banjo, and there's two. We're gonna talk about that. The Banshee it's kind of the forgotten airplane, and that's not fair because it gave great service and it had a lot of advantages over the Panther. The Navy was so impressed with the F-86 that they had a navalized version, the Fury, but of course, it was so modified that there wasn't a whole lot. You could see the lineage, but it was basically a different airplane. But this kit, which I think is a good marketing idea, because we all know how many dozen times have companies marketed, taking kits they already had and just, hey, let's throw both of them in a box and make some sort of adversary kit. But when you think of Korean War and aviation, you think of the MiG-15 and the F-86, and in the Army you tend to think of MASH because they were so big in pop culture. If you watch the movie Battle Hymn, which was made in '57 with Rock Hudson, that's when you see the F-51D Mustangs in action. And it's a good movie. In fact, it was introduced by General Partridge, who was the commander of that Air Force that Dean Hess flew in. But Killer Hess. But unlike the movie, though, one thing I will tell you, the P-51 or F-51, it was really not the airplane for the job. Obviously, it was working as a ground attack aircraft and they did get some air-to-air kills against props, against North Korean yaks. And I know there were some MiG shoot-downs by props. Sea Fury got one, and I think a Sky Raider got one. That might have been in Vietnam, though. But anyway, I think a Corsair might have got one also. I don't think a Mustang ever got one, got a jet. But the Mustang was what they had, and I've been doing some research for my build, and I tell you what, they had to fight the conflict with what they had. A lot of them came out of guard units. Guys like Hess were put in them because he was a reservist. And by the way, unlike what you see in the movie, he didn't volunteer. He was called up. And but you see, and I like that movie because it does a good job of showing what they were up against. But the Mustang was not an airplane for ground attack because it had liquid cooled systems, and it was very vulnerable even to small arms fire if you hit the coolant system or the engine. those big radials on the Sky Raiders, the Thunderbolts, the Corsair, and they would have been better off with Thunderbolts because of that big R2800. And I'm not knocking the Mustang. In World War II, it was the air superiority fighter. 5 years later, though, it was obviously obsolete as a fighter, and using as ground attack was just begging for trouble. And we lost a lot of them due to their vulnerabilities to ground fire. But the guys did their missions. They worked with what they had, and also a lot of those Mustangs were getting pretty tired. A lot of more World War II veterans. They've been in guard units. Can you imagine being in the Air National Guard in whatever state, or perhaps the reserves, flying a Mustang? You're kind of a weekend warrior. To you, it's just kind of a paid flying club, and then they send you to Korea to actually go fight in combat in the same airplane you were flying in the States, which is, ready to go to some collector or a museum or something. But this kit from you can, of course, any P-51D, you can get decals set and make a Korean or Republic of Korea or an American Air Force one. But this is specifically made, and there are differences. The Tamiya kit actually has in the cockpit, it tells you if you're making the Korean version, you want this and this. So Tamiya even went out of their way to make sure that your Korean version has the Korean War upgrades. And they're nothing significant. In fact, I don't really think you can tell anything from the outside. But I think it's really cool that they do that. So, the mighty F-51D. And everybody and their brother makes a Mustang. And they were occasionally fighting planes like the Yak-9. Which actually was I don't think I like that box art, with him shooting down an American Mustang. I don't like him shooting down one of our boys. But it was, the Yak-9 is an awesome fighter, and it can give a Mustang a run for its money. And just ask the late war Luftwaffe. But this is the only one I could find. It's by A model. I don't know if anybody's built this or built any A model kits. And of course, you could get a Yak-9, just a regular from any company that makes it, and put the North Korean little markings on. It's a very simple paint job. The bulk of it's in weathering. But in the movie Battle...
What company is A model in? What country is A model in?
I want to say they're Czech. Czech or Ukrainian. Okay. I should know that. But in the movie Battle Hymn, they go up against Yaks, which are portrayed by T-28s, which wouldn't stand a prayer against a Mustang, but, it's a movie. They worked with what they had. But, hey, you'd have to be careful because that thing looks a lot like a Mustang. It would be real easy to cause a fracture side. But then again, that's why we were painting our planes with big red wingtips and stuff, and yellow tails so you could identify them.
The rudder's different.
Yeah, Ken, at 400 miles an hour, somebody shooting at you, that can be a hard thing to pick out. But you're right. Studying the profile of the airplane is important. But not an airplane to trifle with, that's for sure. Ukraine, okay. Yeah, it is Ukraine. But the Yak was not the Yak-9 was not an airplane to trifle with. And the problem...
What kind of engine did it have?
Probably a Klimov, but I'm not really sure. I'll say one thing with the Russians.
Horsepower?
I would assume somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500. But that airplane, if I'm not mistaken, they actually still have the capacity to make planes like that. The Russians keep the ability to make these old airplanes. They just don't want the skill set, the knowledge base to be lost. And aircraft collectors have had vintage airplanes literally built from the ground up. There was a group that had 3 Japanese Zeros built from the ground up by the Russians, by this Russian company that does this stuff, from nothing but plans. They did not have a single part. And of course, they used Pratt & Whitney engines. They didn't have Sakai's. But they built 3 of them. I remember seeing a video of the three. These are not AT6 conversions. I was shocked. And then I found out from one of my acquaintances who's big in the Warbird stuff. He said, yeah, and he goes, and they were all pieces of crap. They did real slipshod work. They had to be torn down when we got here. A lot of stuff had to be fixed. I'm like, yeah, but they still built 3 Zeros from scratch. I mean, that's not nothing. I realized they had to pull skin and fix stuff, and They were making it like they make their warplanes, quick and dirty. But I mean, think about it. That means they still maintain. Suppose there's an EMP attack or something like that, right? Where all the electronics are going out. You need, EMP war begins. You need an airplane that EMP doesn't affect, and they still have the capacity to manufacture these things. And I mean, I know that's kind of going out there, but still, And frankly, I'm just glad to see they're not letting the skill set get lost. How many people, in modern aviation know how to do control cable splicing or patch aluminum, that kind of stuff, or form metal. It's just, these are skills that who knows what you'll need in the future. And I'll be honest with you, if somebody said, hey, well, for whatever reason you're fighting in props again, Yak 9 might be at the top of my list of one of the airplanes to pick to go into battle with. That airplane was designed from experience and was purely practical. Didn't have the nice fit and finish of a Mustang, but their attitude was, so what? It's a combat aircraft. Because Mustangs are made like a Swiss watch. It's amazing, the beautiful, just a lot of people know this, but the Mustangs, they always painted the wings aluminum on them. That's not the natural color. Because North American would put like this Bondo type material and buff it out in the seams and then buff it down and paint the wing so, to smooth it out. It's one of the reasons the Mustang was such a kick-butt airplane. And, the other countries, they're just overlapping the metal and bolting, smacking the rivets in. That's got to get to the battlefield. Whereas America, I mean, it had a Rolls-Royce Merlin, the Packard Merlin, copy of the Rolls-Royce Merlin, because it was a Packard or a Rolls-Royce of an airplane. And, what they say, if it looks right, it flies right. The other one, Twin Mustang, F-82. Saw some action in Korea and pioneered night fighting. Is a weird airplane. It is not two Mustangs put together. The fuselage is longer. It's a very different airplane. It takes a lot of technology and design cues from the Mustang, but it is not two Mustangs riveted together. The seventh carrier.
A special on
yeah.
TV a few years ago about the twin Mustang, and they said that there was a very small percentage of commonality in parts between the two planes.
Very, very small, almost none. I mean, 5 or 10% at the most. But you can see the design elements copied from the laminar flow wing, the same engine, a similar design of the canopies. Although, by the way, they just got an F-82 flying. Guys have been working on it for decades. And it just, within the last year, made its maiden flight. So there's one F-82 still flying. And it was actually a pretty impressive performing airplane. And with that early radar...
How many did they make? How many did they make?
I don't know. Not that many. Somebody can probably Wikipedia it. I would imagine just a few hundred. Or maybe, Of course, you have to remember, back then, those airplanes are much simpler than aircraft today. They go, look, they made 800 of them. I'm kind of like, which is impressive, but I'm like, yeah, but that's not like making 800 F-35s or F-15s. I mean, the airplanes are basically aluminum and engines and gas tanks and gun sights. But the computer sat in the pilot's seat. I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I think it primarily worked as a night fighter, but it wasn't in inventory that long because the jets eventually just replaced it. It was an interim aircraft. And by the way, piece of side note, technically speaking, if I remember correctly, the Twin Mustang actually flew just before the end of World War II. So one could make the argument that, like the Bearcat, even though it never saw combat, it was technically a World War II aircraft, although probably measured in days. But it is of that era. And, of course, it was an interim airplane. And I've never really read anything bad about it. Most of the stuff I've read about it's been pretty positive. And, of course, all 6 guns fired between the props. So you had with all 6 guns right side by side, you had this nice, there was no convergence point. You know, you just straight ahead and it just obliterated whatever it hit. Now, the airplane that we went to Korea with, the P-80 or F-80 by then, and see, this box says P-80C and IL-10 over Korea. It would have been the F-80 by then, which I know is picking a nit, but that's what we model builders do. And the IL-10 was a follow-on to the IL-2 Sturmovik, and the North Koreans had a bunch of them, and we enjoyed trying to shoot them down. The P-80/F-80, of course, was our first operational jet fighter, not including the Air Comet because that was just a learning tool. The F-80 was a real fighting airplane. In fact, that's what Dick Bong was killed in. The fighter, our top-scoring fighter ace of World War II, was test flying one and crashed. Before, they didn't have an ejection seat back then. He crashed takeoff. I think it was a fuel feed problem. But and it didn't make much in the way of the news because it made the news the same day we dropped the bomb in Hiroshima. Shot down 40 Japanese aircraft, survived multiple tours in combat, be killed doing a test flight. But I think Don Gentilay was killed flying one a few years later. If I remember correctly, I think it was at Moody up in Valdosta, if I remember right. But they had a pressurized fuel system. It was like the fuel cap popped off and the fuel siphoned into the engine and flamed it out, or I forget what happened, but it was a problem the airplane was known to have that had to be fixed. These early generation jets, they guzzled gas, especially down low. They were groundhogs trying to get them off the ground, and they were pretty unforgiving. But they were the big leap forward. And to me, the P-80 was, you know, Clarence Kelly Johnson, who basically designed the thing, had made the drawings in the early 40s, like 42, 43, when the idea first popped up. And you look at his initial drawings, which is basically what became the airplane, and you're amazed by the simplicity. I mean, he just sat down and go, okay, then it'll be a tricycle gear, the motor will go here, the intakes will be there, we'll have a round nose with guns sticking out. That's pretty much what they made. And it worked. And they used the stretch version with the dual seats, the T-33, as a trainer up until like 1980. So it was a solid platform, typical Lockheed. But it was no match for a MiG, and we learned that real quick. I mean...
Way underpowered?
No, straight wings. MiG swept wing.
Oh, so not as fast.
MiG could go higher, it could go faster, it could pick and choose the battle. You know, it could come in, blast away at you with its cannons. Preferably, look, if you're in a dogfight, you've already made a mistake. Hopefully, they'll just come and scream them on high. You'll know they're there when your airplane falls apart. But you couldn't outrun it. I don't know if it could outturn it. And you certainly couldn't outclimb it or go high enough to catch it. So the MiG carried most of the advantages. And remember, we were on the attack. They could lay an ambush. But there wasn't a lot of radar control back then. It was pretty much, the Mark I eyeball scanning for trouble. And also, when they were taking off out of Japan, that one's got the stretch fuel tanks. A couple of young lieutenants in the Air Force realized those little teardrop tanks hanging off the tips. That when they got to Korea, they had like 7 minutes. It's like the Messerschmitts over London. They had like 7 minutes where they had to turn around and run away, leaving the bombers exposed. Well, these guys were the bombers. And they go racing in and try and hit the target, get the heck out while they still had gas without getting jumped. And a couple of lieutenants realized, hey, if you take the front end and the rear end of these tanks and split it in half and put a section of, aluminum section in the middle, just add a couple of sections to it, you got a lot more fuel and the mounts can handle it. So I think they called them Mikuni tanks. But that gave them the ability to have more loiter time. You head out, you siphon the fuel out of those tip tanks as fast as you're burning, so that if you have to punch them off, you're not losing fuel. You're just dropping empty tanks. And you go and you dogfight, and you got an extra 8-10 minutes over the target, which could be critical, and scoot home with a little bit of reserve. The Navy didn't like to punch off its tanks if it didn't have to, because the Air Force could just get as many tanks as they wanted and stack them up on the airfield. The Navy guys had to operate off of a ship. And Ken, owning a boat, one thing that is at a premium on a ship is storage space. And those things ate up a lot of it. But the P-80...
If you didn't bring it with you, you didn't have it.
That's right. And, I just had a thought, just popped into my head. What they should have done, since the Navy has first-rate machinists, what they should have done was just brought the machinery and a bunch of sheet aluminum to make new ones as needed. That might be a little more than they could do on board ship, but it is, after all, just a hollow tank. But anyway, the P-80 soldiered on, but man, you did not want to get caught in a dogfight when you couldn't run away. The guy was faster than you were. It's like a P-80 against a MiG-15 was like the chess club champion, picking a fight with the star linebacker. And but in kits they did Lindbergh.
Poor analogy, but I get it.
Yeah, Lindbergh actually put the F-94, which I don't think the F-94s were in Korea, but they were flying at that time. They made that 2-in-1 value pack on the small scale ones. And of course, the F-94 only had rockets. It didn't even have a gun or a gun sight, which the Battle of Palmdale proved that to be a big mistake, but that's another story.
So why did they forget that? Why did they forget it again when they came out with the F-4?
There's no excuse. Because, Ken, it's all going to be missiles, man. It's all going to be missiles. Push button. Lock them up with the radar. Okay. Hold on. Since you brought that up.
We got him going, Steve.
It's tangent time. All right. The F-4 Phantom, only one of the greatest planes ever made, was designed as a fleet defense interceptor for the Navy. All right? That was what it was designed for. Its job was to take off from the carrier, fly out a couple of 100 miles very fast, lock up enemy bombers with its radar, shoot the big missiles, watch the bombers go boom boom. Then if they didn't get them, if you did get in a dogfight, use the heat seekers, or if the bombers weren't all there, just keep shooting missiles until you ran Winchester. You're out of ammo. Okay? And for a Tu-4 Bull or a Bison or a Badger, that probably would have worked just fine. It was never intended to be the twisty-turny dogfighter, nor was its missile system designed for that. It was to go up and shoot down bombers. That was its job. The same thing that the Canadian CF-105 Arrow was going to be designed to do. The airplane didn't have to be a turning dogfighter, didn't need the turning fight, because it was going to go up and shoot down unescorted bombers. So, when everybody took this magnificent flying machine and tried to turn it into something it wasn't, we ran into problems. And there was way too much faith by the administration in the primitive missile systems, because although they were doing okay on ranges in the American Southwest where it's dry, you have company representatives using white glove maintenance on the missiles. It was the first time they'd ever been on an airplane was they shot down a test drone. Now you send these things over to Vietnam where it's dank and the moisture gets into everything, and they're bouncing down roads in the back of trucks getting delivered. They're being manhandled by, Airman E4, Airman E3. They're going up and down and they're hanging on. And why take it off the jet once it's on there? Okay? So let's leave it on the jet and go up and fly 8 or 10 or 12 missions, cold soak. Bring it back down, let it warm up, let the moisture get in, go fly another mission, cold soak. And you know what? Maybe we should take one off and have some maintenance done. Let's throw on the back of a Deuce and a half, drive it 50 miles down to the depot level, have them look at it, bounce it down the road coming back, strap it back on the airplane, wash, rinse, repeat. Now, one of those missiles were failing. And even on board ship, it was the same thing. They were still getting cold soaked. And if I'm not mistaken, on the carriers, they normally didn't disarm them. So they just stayed on the airplane until they were used. And at least for many missions. So they were being... they were no longer in the white glove environment. And the missiles did have a very bad failure rate. I mean, we're talking, 80% of our Sparrows and 70% of our Sidewinders missed or couldn't lock up or whatever. So there's a lot of reasons for that. But the F-94 predated all that. It had a radar, but it used free flight missiles like the F-86D, the Sabre Dog. Get in there with the radar, get in close, and just salvo those missiles. You're bound to hit something. And as we learned in the Battle of Palmdale, that's not necessarily true. And for those who are unaware, at the Battle of Palmdale, a Navy S-6F Hellcat drone plane got loose. They lost control of it. So they sent a couple of aircraft to go shoot it down, and the first ones are F-94s. And they salvoed all their rockets and never hit it. Now, mind you, it's a lot smaller than a bomber. But people were like, how, why? Well, they did what they were supposed to. They locked it up with the radar, did everything, and salvoed the rockets. Like, why not get in close and use the gun sight? Because it didn't have a gun sight, because it didn't have a gun. See the flaws in the thinking here?
So how do you really feel about this, Max?
Hey, that's the most important thing that happened, because when they realized that 2 fully loaded Air Force interceptors could not shoot down a blaze pink drone, okay, flying in a straight line with the latest toys the Air Force had, oh, yeah, okay, we need to take another look at things, boys. And that is what led to the development of things like heat-seeking missiles. Anyway, the drone finally ran out of gas and crashed out in the desert and did less damage than the rockets they'd fired that came to Earth and might have started some forest fires. But you guys can go to Wiki and look at the Battle of Palmdale. So I'm probably getting half the facts wrong, but you get the point. Now, there was a Skytruck in the Korean War that I think is one of the most overlooked airplanes, and that ain't right. And we're going to do something about that tonight. And that's the F-84, and that's my Tamiya F-84 right here doing the 360s behind me. And I've only talked to one F-84 pilot, and that's Joe Kittinger, the famous parachutist. And I asked him because he commanded a squadron in Germany. And apparently some guys would not fly this thing because I believe it was the Allison engine was so unreliable. There were a lot of ejections out of them, which I thought was too bad because from what I've read, although it was straight wing and couldn't dogfight with a crap with a MiG, it had very little chance against a MiG. Just like the P-80, it was slower, couldn't outclimb it, couldn't outrun it. But it was primarily used for hitting ground targets. And they said it was a rock solid gun platform, bombing platform, and missile platform. The MiGs may not have been scared of it, but the guys on the ground sure as heck were. And and it was your typical Republic design. This is made by the same people who made the Thunderbolt, so it was built like a tank. What?
Apparently, somebody was asking, "What's the topic for tonight?" And William replied, "The topic for tonight is Robert." Tonight the topic tonight for Robert is Max is going to get drunk and relax.
But now, again, this is one of the first jets the Air Force ever got. They were flying this thing, I think, in 1947. Now, you'll notice little white stripes around both canopies. Okay. The F-84, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay. You'll notice little white stripes on the bubble canopy, right? That is not aluminum framing. Those are white, I want to say fiberglass reinforcing strips. The early F-84s just had a bubble canopy. But as the airplane started going faster and faster and faster, it started to deform the canopy. They realized the canopy needed structural improvement. So they just put these fiberglass reinforcing stripes on them. And they're really, really, really hard to decal. In fact, let me see if I can just show you mine. And this was all hand done. But, anyway.
Dennis says, Max isn't a mean drunk. That's good.
No, I'm a lovable drunk. I'm very Otis Campbell. But those stripes are all hand done. And the hardest part for me was the round part there where their little navigation equipment peers through. I think it's like a little astrogator or something. But this is one of my favorite builds. This one came out, and Tammy, of course, gives you a weight for the nose. It's a little dusty. But this came out really well. I got all the decals on it and everything. I'm very happy with the way that turned out. Of course, it's on a bombing mission. And,
So they hung bombs on there really far back.
well, center of gravity thing. It's all based on your CG. And,
So the CG was way behind the wing?
no, the bombs, Ken, the bombs are right in here. Let me show you.
What are those things in the back? JADOs?
Oh, no. Oh, you talking about the holes in the back? You see the bomb hanging under the wing. You see the bombs and the fuel tanks hanging in the same place, right under the wing. Here, hold on.
Okay, but bring the plane back. It's the little round cylindrical.
Oh yeah, those are JADOs. Yes, those are JADOs. Remember what I said about being about ground loving hoes? Groundhogs. So yes, they a lot of these things use JADO jet assist, or actually RADOs, rocket assist. Good eye, Ken. But there was one of these things that was actually capable of getting back into flying condition, and they towed it out, and they were talking about how they could probably get the engine to run and get it flyable. Get that camera to focus. But they decided not to. I think the Allison engine just wasn't reliable enough, and I'm like, yeah, that's too much of a valuable artifact. But the F-84 is one of those airplanes that should be remembered better than it is, and I think it's kind of a crime against aviation history that isn't better remembered. Of course, everybody remembers the Sabre. Everybody makes the Sabre. It's the P-51 of Korea. It's the pretty girl that every guy wants to fly. But it was a good airplane. And the one on the right, by the way, is John Glenn's aircraft. People forget that Glenn shot down 3 MiGs in Korea, flying with the Air Force. Even though he's a Marine, he flew his airplane MiG Mad Marine. And
so was the Sabre? I don't think the Sabre was superior to the MiGs, was it?
They were virtually a dead heat. Each of them had a few advantages. The MiG could fly about 2,000 feet higher than the Sabres we used in Korea. Later models could catch it. It had a lower wing loading, so it could turn a little better and climb faster. The Sabre could go Mach 1 in a dive. The MiG could not, because the Sabre had a flying tail. If you took a MiG Mach 1, she'd lose control. The MiG-15. And it had a better gun sight. It had a radar calibrating gun sight. That's what that little black tip on the nose is. That's a little radar for the gun. And it had... now, when it had the 650 calibers, they have a thing called weight of shot. And the 650 calibers, which have worked great in World War II, turned out to be, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but 650 calibers turned out to be a little anemic against the MiGs. So the later ones went to 420 millimeters, and that was much more effective. The problem with the 20 millimeters was getting rid of all the gun gas, without flaming out the engine. So they had some problems getting the 20 millimeters to work well in the airplane, but it did have more weight of shot and was more devastating when it hit the target. Jet engines, although very delicate machines, are actually quite robust, and they learned that you could pump a MiG full of 50 cal rounds and it'd smoke and everything, but it'd fly home. And so they had to upgun them. But the big advantage the MiGs had was they were coming right out of North Korea. The Sabres, depending on where they were based, when they were having to fly for Japan, they had the same range issues that everybody else had. Remember, aerial refueling wasn't really a thing yet. But once we got our bases back in Korea, because, the front line kept moving back and forth for the first year, but once we got Taegu and Kempo and them back, now they could go up MiG Alley, which was up around the Yalu, and with plenty of fuel. And it was basically World War II style dogfights in jets. The missiles weren't out yet. So it was, it was all guns. And the Sabre was a much more expensive airplane than the MiG, but it was also more sophisticated and in many ways more capable. If they could have put a couple of 1,000 pounds more thrust in the Sabre, I think it would have had every advantage over the MiG, which they did later on, but by then they were getting ready to move on to other aircraft because you were hitting airframe limitations. By the way, the Sabre has no small amount of Messerschmitt 262 technology in the wing design and the landing gear. It's if you were to make a single engine Me 262, it'd probably and clip the wingtips, it'd probably wind up looking a lot like a Sabre. But the North American just hit that one out of the park. But what I like about North American, a lot of these companies and Convair and the rest of them was, unlike certain countries, we had no problem with using the technology of other countries that we had come across. In fact, with the Russians, it was a virtual staple of many of their designs. But the F-86 is probably, next to the MASH helicopter, the single most iconic emblem of the Korean War. And of course, we had the yellow bands on all of our F-86s because they look so bloody much like MiGs. We didn't want to shoot each other down by mistake. But the Navy and the Marines were in a somewhat different situation. Remember that we talked about they had to operate off of ships. So even though they were using up-engine, four-bladed prop, 20-millimeter cannon armed Corsairs, they were still using Corsairs and Sky Raiders. The Sky Raiders, another one of those airplanes that was made for World War II, but just didn't get deployed in time. And I believe all the Sky Raiders in the Korean War, I don't know if any of those airplanes had seen World War II service or if that version had come out after the war. But the Corsair turned out to be still a completely valid and valuable part of the program. What?
Nothing.
Wasn't me.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody saying something. But they're, it's funny, the monogram kits of Korea. A lot of the Corsair kits out there have Korean War markings, but on the box art, a lot of times they try to sell them as, Pacific Island World War II Corsair. I'm like, dude, you got the red bar. That's the post-war. That's a Korean War model. Remember, after the war, so World War II was over before we added that red bar into the white bar on each side of the star. If you see that red, white, and blue on the side of the airplane, that is post-World War II. And
Dragon's Marine said, I like putting obscure things inside fuselage builds to confuse future archaeologists.
I like how Chris says, who has a cat on his workbench?
I used to see Honey going it.
Scrolled off.
Honey used to. Do we still have a second cat? No, Chris. Unfortunately, Gus had to go back. He couldn't adjust to being here. He wasn't happy. He wouldn't come out from under the bed. And when his previous caretaker showed up, he jumped into her arms, and we all realized he was here a month. He just wasn't going to work, so we had to let him go. Sorry. Red stripe added in 47. There you go. Yeah. And that's also, I think, when the new naming conventions came out. That's when the Navy dropped all these complex designators and everything became pretty straightforward. But the Corsair, people forget the Corsairs were used by some countries through the 60s. And I think their last combat was in the Soccer War in Central America. But, a good design's a good design. And when you're fighting Korea, although there was high altitude bombing, mostly by B-29s, and there was jet-to-jet dogfights and all this stuff, the air war in Korea was never the deciding factor. I mean, as far as air-to-air combat, air support for ground operations, and I have heard this from every branch of service, including my ROTC instructor who was there, and he said, make no mistake, air power, ground attack was what made the difference in Korea. But I mean, they're not even, there wasn't a hint of doubt in his voice, and they're like, we can prove that by any metric you want. Even the North Koreans admitted that it was air power that made the difference. Artillery was important, but artillery not only has certain limitations, We just didn't have enough of it. And airplanes can drop bombs, go back, reload, rearm, come drop more bombs all day long. They can do it all day long. And they can spot, unlike an artillery shell where, you're calling, for the round to, they're trying to hit a target. The guy in the airplane can see the target, you mark it, he can see it, and he can start putting ordnance right on that thing. And the B-29s could carpet bomb. It was just, air power made the difference in Korea. If it had not been for air power, Korea would be a unified country and not under the Western banners. And a lot of World War II equipment that was either too late for World War II or just served at the end got a chance to show what it could do. And the Corsair was front and center for the Navy and Marines. In fact, they made that movie recently. I think what was the name of it? About it was the first black naval aviator who got shot down on a ground attack mission, and his buddy ditched beside him and tried to stay with him, but he couldn't save him. But at least he didn't die alone. But they made a movie about that recently, and you see what those guys. I mean, a lot of it's CGI, but it's pretty well done. You realize what they were putting up with. I mean, we were not ready for the Korean War. We were pulling crap out of mothballs, and that's one reason we had to use so much World War II hardware. That's why a lot of these reservist and Air Guard guys are getting hauled back into active duty. In fact, the old Oscar Brand says, here's to the regular Air Force. They have such a wonderful plan. Send the reserves to Korea while the regulars stay in Japan. And that's actually a lot of truth in that, because it was reserve units that were flying these prop jobs. That's what they needed for the ground attack missions. The regular Air Force was primarily flying the air superiority fighters. So they went out of Japan. So anyway, staying with the Navy, another forgotten airplane, unjustly so, the mighty Banshee. The Banjo, as they called it, was another early jet, and they made actually quite a few different versions of the airplane, and one of them, which was almost a clean sheet design, was like a third again the size of the original one. It could go higher than a Panther. It wasn't faster, but it made a great recon airplane. It was the Navy got a lot of. In fact, the Canadians people forget the Canadians had an aircraft carrier at this point during the Cold War, and they flew Banjos off of it. The Canadians used the Banshee, and it was actually a pretty well respected airplane. And I have one hanging up in the garage, and I used to think that mistakenly that the Banshee was like, oh, that's what the Navy had, because it looks a lot like that the early Phantom 1 with the straight wing and everything. But, oh, it's just an upgraded Phantom. They didn't, it wasn't that big a deal. The Cougar was a much better airplane. I found out, no, actually the Banshee was a really good airplane, and it had a lot of growth potential. In fact, I think they used the Banshees longer than the Cougars. Cougar actually wasn't. The Panther. Panther wasn't actually in service all that long with primary units. Speaking of which, next is the Panther, and you can tell the Banshee and the Panther look a lot alike. But the Panther, you were talking about, Steve.
Yes.
Everybody and their brother makes a model of the Panther. Trumpeter makes some really good ones. You got AMT. I don't know why AMT. You think of them as a car model company.
They probably bought somebody and that mold was there.
That's very possible. That's even likely. But the Panther was a good, solid jet. I believe the only Panther I have a model of is the old Aurora kit, which is like a 14-piece kit. There ain't much to it, or 18-piece kit. It's typical early Aurora. And it comes with a big nose spike because they made it from the test article. And but the Marines and the Navy used the Panther, and they upgraded it a few times. In fact, the latest version of the Panther, and the way you can tell it is the wing fillet goes straight to the tail. It was actually a very upgraded airplane, very different than the original. But I'm thinking of the Cougar. I'm sorry. The Panther was limited by the straight wing, just like the Banshee was. So they all knew that, hey, these designs are interim. They're only going to be around for a while. The Panther did a lot of fighting in Korea, and several movies, Bridges of Tokyo-ri, Men of the Fighting Lady. It seems to be Hollywood's favorite Navy jet for the Korean War movies, and they were in the thick of it. 420mm cannons and I think 6 rockets, so they were reasonably well, and they could carry bombs also. And in fact, William Holden bought it on the secondary target, the Bridges of Tokyo-ri. And but they're...
So on this AMT kit, is that Ted Williams on the box?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay.
Ted Williams was a Corsair pilot. I think it was a Corsair pilot in World War II, and he was a Marine, and he was a Panther pilot. And I read an article. Williams he'd been shot up, and he wasn't going to make it back to the carrier, so he went to one of the land-based airfields. It's an Air Force base. It might have been K5, but he had to make a belly landing, and the fireman gets up and pries the canopy up and looks at him and goes, "Hey, you're Ted Williams." And he's kind of like, "Can you get me the hell out of here?" You know?
Get out of my way.
Get out of my way. Yeah. But he was not, I don't think he was like William Holden. I don't think he was too thrilled to be called back to active service. But yeah, that's what happens. And but the Panther was a good solid airplane, typical Grumman Iron Works product. Although it flew before the end of the Korean War, the Cougar, which was basically the swept wing version of this airplane, never saw combat, the single-seater. The two-seaters later in Vietnam saw a little bit of service in combat. But the Navy was so content with the design, which they knew was an interim jet, that they realized they were going to have to get a swept-wing airplane. So they told Grumman, keep as much compatible with the Panther as you can. Keep costs down, keep the logistics chain down. So they redesigned the Panther and put the swept wing on it, made a bunch of changes, and made the swept wing Cougar, which was a pretty cool airplane. Never really a first-rate fighter because too many compromises had to be made. But they got it to be a vice-free airplane, and it gave the Navy what they needed in the short term. But limited range, actually had less range than the Panther, I think. And, still wasn't really a supersonic airplane except maybe in a dive. But it was a very, very important step for both Grumman and the Navy to get to start moving towards more capable airplanes. Now here's an airplane a lot of people have never even heard of, and they're probably not aware that it got our first night radar kill. The F-3D Skyknight. This airplane, which by the way primarily operated from land bases with the Marine Corps, it was ugly. It was not particularly fast. It had a pilot who was an officer and a radar operator who was a sergeant. And it was a purpose-built night fighter. It's big and got that big nose so they can house a big primitive radar. But it worked. And they got night kills, the first night kill, using radar, stock enemy aircraft. And they...
Actually an interesting looking plane.
Yeah, it was straight wing because it was designed to fly off a carrier with those old anemic engines. You see them on the ground, they're squat as can be because the engines are down on the bottom. It's all but forgotten to history because it wasn't a beauty queen. Wasn't particularly fast, but it was a purpose-built night radar interceptor. And for the time, it actually did the job. And it's all but forgotten to history except amongst the hardcore aviation buffs. And again, another little injustice of history, but again, unlike the Panther and the Sabre, it's not a sexy looking airplane. So, and it did its job at night. So, it never developed a fan base the others did. It is got one of the easiest paint jobs you'll ever put on a model. All flat black with, a little silver around the engines and the cockpit framing, and you're done. But the Marines made it work. God bless them. The Corps doesn't complain about the equipment you give them. They just make it work. And they actually were good enough that they were used into Vietnam. Although I think they had a couple of them get shot down. They realized they'd kind of outlived their usefulness. But but it had a longer service life than you would think, and it's one of those airplanes that most people never heard of, and kind of unfair, but it's life. Now, another airplane that a lot of people forget, the British and the Australians and a lot of others were in Korea with us. And, Americans, we tend to be U.S. centric, and we forget about all the guys that went over there and helped us. And the British Fairey Firefly actually saw apparently a fair amount of action in Korea. And 48-hour Hobby is the only ones. I'm sure you could get any kid of the Fairey Firefly, put it in Korean markings, but this says it's the Korean version. I don't know if they put the invasion stripes on them in Korea or not. I have to go look at the paint schemes, but that's what they claim on the box art. But again, Firefly was actually a pretty good airplane, from what I understand, and it was a light bomber that could fight. It could be used as a fighter if you had to, and then they had to fly it off a carrier. So again, one of the people just forget those planes were there. Then they also forget that the Brits were fighting with the Hawker Sea Fury, which came out a little late for World War II, but it made a show, and I believe a Sea Fury bagged a MiG. I'm almost sure of that. And that's still a favored racing plane today. People kind of ruffle when aviation buffs say this, but it's true. Sea Fury can outperform a Mustang. Now, it's a later design. A little bit of a cousin to the Tempest. And if I remember correctly, that has one of those sleeve valve engines where the entire sleeve inside the piston rotates, and because it doesn't have valves. And I saw an animation with those working. I was like, okay, whoever designed this was either on acid or British. I don't know what the British fascination with complicating things mechanically is, but it worked. And I guess when you get right down to it, having the sleeve go up and down or back and forth, I guess that really isn't that much different than having push rods with valves on them. The whole thing, I just, having been raised on engines with valves, the idea of this arm going around in a circle, making the sleeve rotate back and forth in time with the piston moving, I'm kind of like, okay, sorry guys, it's going to take me a while to warm up to that idea. Actually, in the lower left here, it has the artwork of the Sea Fury. Let me see if I can. There's the artwork of the Sea Fury down in the MiG. Hey, he's got 20 millimeter cannons, man. And he's going 400, 500 miles an hour. The MiG's got maybe a 100 mile an hour speed advantage, but that ain't going to outrun them 20 millimeters. You get in front of his gun sight, he's going to let you have it. And, oh, God, mad dogs and Englishmen. The Sea Fury did surprisingly well. The Meteor, which, of course, is the British jet, was also in Korea. People forget about it. And it apparently, because of the excellently trained pilots, because the British train their pilots as well as anybody in the world, and since they had a smaller air force, they could be far more selective. But the MiG had every performance advantage. The Meteor was straight winged and a limited roll rate because all the weight and the inertia in those engines. But they made it work. Although I think they lost a few. But and the Meteor, not the F.8 version, but the Meteor did see combat in World War II chasing down buzz bombs. People forget the British were flying combat jets during World War II. And again, when the war broke out, they had to fight with what they had. And they managed to make it work. The famous MiG-15, no surprise there. Everybody and their brother makes a MiG-15. There are even songs written about it. The prettiest jet I've ever seen. The MiG-15, she's lean and mean. But the MiG has got a lot of advantages. These kits, the monogram kit is okay. I'm assuming the Bronco kit's probably pretty top shelf. I actually probably should have brought mine in, but the MiG was, you could not be more Russian than this airplane. Brutish, simple, rugged, reliable, easy to maintain. You needed about a 12-piece tool set to pretty much do anything on the airplane. It was a piece of industrial equipment. It was a jet built like a farm tractor. Yet it had a lower wing loading and more thrust than the Sabre, so it could climb faster, go up a couple of thousand feet higher. It had a pair of 23 millimeters and that slow-firing 37 millimeter. So if you got hit by it, you were in serious trouble. Only good thing for us was it wasn't the greatest gun platform because it didn't have a radar, a range adjust. It didn't have a leading sight, if I'm not mistaken, radar adjusted, and it didn't have the greatest gun sight. And the rate of fire of the big gun was so slow that there were MiG pilots reported squeezing the trigger as a F-86 went streaking by, and they literally saw one round go in front of the Sabre and the other round go behind it. He literally flew through the gaps in the rounds. And if you had to equip a second or third world Air Force, anybody could keep this thing flying. I've been up close to MiG-15s on many occasions. I was looking at buying one, and I was inspecting one, and I was like, the Zeus Fasters are designed so a large European coin can open every panel on the airplane. And I was looking, and I was just like, the fit and finish on that airplane, I can't even use it fit and finish. The fit and unfinish. I mean, they just push the two aluminum pieces together and start driving the rivets in. I'm like, hey, you know what? It worked. You could maintain this thing with the tools in your garage. And you can burn home heating oil in it. If it's kerosene based or petroleum based, odds are that engine would burn it. I was planning to fuel mine with home heating oil. It was cheaper. It'll digest just about any kind of fuel, which is exactly what you need in an airplane like that. That's why they made, I don't know, 20,000 of the things, and they served all over the world. I think there's still a few countries that might even have a couple in service today, or at least the follow-ons in 19. I think the Albanians still had some 19s, I think, or 17s, but next Korean War, I'd like to build that because I built the monogram kit. And don't get me wrong, the monogram kit is a day build. You literally, it's just as many parts as you would think. It's got a few details, not a lot. And you just shoot the whole thing in aluminum when you're done. It is an easy build. Trey was just talking about, he's building that 1/32 scale Cessna 310, Messerschmitt 110. And he was showing in his video that the bottom of the wing has a step, where it mates. He's having to shave it down. That's the kind of thing you find on the monogram MiG. Everything goes together. You're like, yeah, you're going to need, if you're going to try and make a really nice build out of it, yeah, you're going to need some putty and sandpaper, heavy grit stuff to get the flush feel. But it doesn't bother me to leave the rough edges on a plane like that because the real one has rough edges. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. One of my favorite airplanes I love to hate. The ugliest jet the Air Force ever flew. The B-45 Tornado. They did see service in Korea. It was also the Air Force's first jet bomber. Ken, your dad, when he was out on that island, was it Diego Garcia or wherever he was based? Ken?
What?
Your dad?
You woke him up.
Yeah.
No. What are you talking about?
Yeah, we woke him up. Your dad showed me those pictures when we were over at his place when he was on, was it Diego Garcia, the island he was stuck on? When he was in the Air Force? Yeah. he says it was an airplane. I never seen one like it. He showed me a photograph. I said, yeah, that's an RB-45. That's a Tornado. And I didn't realize they were still using those things like in the 70s. Well, now they were paid for. Or maybe it was the 60s when he was out there. But, and it's a big airplane. Bigger than, it doesn't look that big in the pictures. You walk up to it, like, holy crap, this is big. The pilots went up through a hatch in the bottom. They had a walkway beside the cockpit. But I was like, the airplane was like a 1945 design. They used it through the 60s. And it's one of those airplanes that they just kind of used as a utility plane after a while because it didn't last long as a bomber. But they did use them in Korea, I think primarily for reconnaissance. And I'm like, straight wing, not that fast. But again, another airplane that the world has forgotten about and gave stalwart service.
Apparently didn't have real long legs if they had to land in Diego Garcia.
Well, damn, Ken. Diego's out in the middle of freaking nowhere.
Oh, yeah.
If you guys right now, if you go online and look for a map of nowhere and put your finger in the middle, that's Diego Garcia. Now, the airplane that served in 3 wars, the A-26, later B-26 Invader. Now, this is what they used at the Bay of Pigs. And it was the A-26 in World War II, the Douglas A-26. And it's a great design. The B-26 Marauder sometimes gets confused with it because they both had 26. Because at the end of the war, all the Marauders were blown up or grounded because they were a high-risk airplane. Weird, the B-26 Marauder, the Air Force didn't want them anymore now that it didn't need them. But at the same time, they didn't want anybody else to have them because they were still fast and capable. So they blew them up. It's not out there anymore. I couldn't find it. I should have saved it. For a while, there was footage on YouTube of the entire American B-26 fleet being blown up in their parking spots. The engineers went in and put charges in the cockpits. And I'm like, that's just a crime. They weren't going to bring them back because they didn't need them. And they were going to go through the expense of bringing them back. And they don't want to leave them in Europe and have the wrong people get their hands on them. So they blew them up. I mean, ouch. But once they were gone and the Air Force became the Air Force in 47, they redesignated the A-26, Attack 26, the B-26 Invader. So that's why people get them confused. The B-26 as the A-26 did see a lot of service in World War II. It was then used extensively in Korea and extensively in Vietnam as a night interdiction aircraft. And I talked to Joe Kittinger, who flew them. They literally flew the wings off those things. They had a couple of wing failures in Vietnam. So he sent them all to D. Howard to have the wing spars trussed up and everything. And they milked some more years out of them. And then they started to use them as aerial tankers, air attack fire bombers. So those airplanes, they're fast. They're pretty agile for a medium bomber. There were a couple of guys who tried to use them as fighters, dogfight, because they had the gun nose version also. And when they had that gun nose, which is what they used in the Bay of Pigs, between that and the rockets they could carry and the bombs they could carry, that airplane could throw a world of hurt on somebody. And I don't know if they had the gun nose model in Korea. They were also used because we gave them to everybody after the war. I think they were used down in the Congo also, in Africa a fair bit, to devastating effect. You think about it. This thing comes screaming in at 300 plus miles an hour, 850 calibers in the nose open up, possibly packet guns on the side on top of that. Then you're launching 5-inch rockets, and as he goes over, he releases a bomb bay full of 500-pounders. That's a world of hurt, and you got 16 of them in a squadron. Yeah, you could put the pinch on somebody. That's a good airplane. There's still a few of them on the air show circuit and in private hands. And this is the airplane they were flying in the movie Always with Richard Dreyfuss and John Goodman and Holly Hunter. They were flying B-26 tankers. And I saw a couple of them in South Carolina, and I went and found the pilot and asked him about getting a job doing air tanking, flying them. And apparently you got to have all kinds of credentials to do that kind of flying, so no go, because it would have been my chance to fly a World War II bomber. But and they air tank them single pilot. And but great airplane. And again, easy paint job, just paint it black. Of course, the B-29s were still used in Korea, and they did okay for a while, but when the MiG showed up, they had to have fighter escort, and we lost a bunch of them. One B-29, the fuselage of which is still in the Air Force Museum today, is a bomber Ace. It shot down 5 MiGs that were trying to attack it. I think it's called Lucky Charm, and boy, that would be a good name for it. But yes, B-29s were used in Korea. And some people go, why didn't they use the B-50, the uprated version? Although they did use them for reconnaissance, because that, I believe, was a nuclear delivery platform. The B-29s have been relegated just to iron bombs. What? Did you have a question?
No, me?
Okay. No. Okay. The little Yak-18, which they did use as a light bomber, and Washing Machine Charlie to go out and harass people at night. And they did bombing missions with them and used them as liaison. They kind of used it for everything. And by all accounts, a really good little airplane. I don't think I'd want to take one into combat, but you use what you got. And that's probably Washing Machine Charlie, go in and do harassment bombings just to keep people from getting a good night's sleep. Their A model's the only people I know that make a kit of it. And again, easy paint job, baby. Paint it black and slap the decals on it. A lot of night fighting going on in Korea. F-82, B-26, Yak-18, the B-45 Tornado. A lot of models. You better buy a lot of black paint. You're going to build a lot of the Korean War stuff.
Yak, the other red meat.
Yeah. The airplane, the Aleutian IL-10, which is just a follow-on to the IL-2, was an upgrade. That was their ground attack airplane. I don't know if they actually used them in the Korean War, but I think they had them. Oh yeah, by the way, the other Washing Machine Charlie, and you had to be a brave soul, and yes, they did this in the Korean War. They actually used the PO-2, which they had done this mission with against the Germans in World War II. That is a 1930s biplane design, basically the Russian answer to the Stearman. And yes, they did do light bombing and night harassment with them. In World War II, they had women pilots called the Night Witches. And in the Korean War, it was, of course, Korean pilots doing it. But
there you go. Okay.
But
we had the other picture on before. That's why it was confusing.
But
yeah.
What?
We had the Aleutian picture on before, and you were talking about the Polakov, and it was like, oh, well, what are we doing here? A little confusing.
All right.
Celebrating Vintage Model Kid says he skipped the Tiger Cat.
The Tiger. Oh my God! I completely forgot that one. You're right. I vaped. The Tiger Cat. The Grumman was at F7.
Now we're going to go back to the beginning, Ken. You shouldn't have said nothing.
Yeah. I can get a picture of it real quick. The Marines use the Tiger Cat. Well, don't let me forget. We'll talk about that. But the PO-2, great little biplane. Everyone is easy to fly. Everybody loved it. Don't think I'd want to go into combat with it. And if I am not mistaken, this artwork of the PO-2 being chased by the Corsair is from an actual incident. And I'm not sure, the guy might have crashed his Corsair going after it. It was a slow-moving night target, a very hard thing to hit. And and you had to have cojones de bronce to do that mission. But I guess it beat being in the infantry. Then, of course, both the Army and the Marines used the Bird Dog. The Air Force later used it. In Marine Corps service, OE-1. In Air Force service, I think it was the O-1. And of the Army, it's the L-19, technically a liaison plane. You saw these also used extensively in Vietnam by both the military and Air America. There's a lot of them in civilian hands. It's basically a two-seat Cessna 170 with a big engine. If you were to park that airplane next to a Cessna 170B, which has the same wing with the 40-degree flaps, the lineage is painfully obvious. And it's just a great little airplane. Everybody I know who's flown, the only quote unquote problem is that they're slow. It's like a 90-100 mile an hour airplane with like a 300 horse engine because it's designed to get out of a tennis court. But it was a fact. It didn't have to go fast.
Is that a missile on the wing?
Marking rockets. White phosphorus.
Oh, okay.
Smoke and Willie Pete. Yeah, they would go in and mark targets with it. Basically, their job was to go out and draw fire. In fact, Vietnamese learned not to shoot at them. And, like, you shoot at that airplane, then the fast movers show up. He flies over, hits you with a smoke rocket. Next thing you know, you got jets dropping bombs on you.
Or the jungle explodes from a shell coming from an offshore battleship.
That could happen too. Yeah. Yep. It's a spotter plane and a liaison aircraft and just a general whatever you need it to be. Obviously designed as a spotter, that's why it has so much plexiglass on it. Great little airplane I built. That is the bagged kit, and I forget who made it. Might have been Airfix. The very first model I ever ordered from the squadron shop back in 1970, probably 1970 or 71, was a bird dog. And I didn't paint it because I never had money for paint. I built it, I put the decals on it, and I played with that thing until I literally just kept breaking the landing gear, making rough field landings, and, I just played with it until I destroyed it.
You put a firecracker in it.
No.
That could have been on your resume for a Delta pilot.
Too soon. Now.
Plastic Slave says, funny thing, when I was getting my glider's license with the Air Cadets, our tow planes were Canadian L-19s rigged with towing gear.
Yeah. I've seen them used as tow tugs, yeah. They're really good at it, too. Now,
Steve Mercer says the Canberra wasn't in Korea. That was a little bit later, wasn't it?
I don't think I know the Canberras are used a lot in Vietnam. I don't think
I don't think it was made till the mid-50s.
Well, let's just take a quick look. Wikipedia, answer my question.
That's what Celebrating Model Kids wants to know.
First flight was in 49.
Craig Swan says, L-19, 4 spotting rockets and 1 M1911-45.
Okay. Production of the Canberra was accelerated as a result of the outbreak of the Korean War. It made a super priority. 5 squadrons to be equipped. They replaced the Mosquitoes, Lincolns, and Washingtons as frontline bombers. Yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. First ones entered service in December of 52 when they were freed out overseas, mostly used in Germany and Cyprus.
Kind of over by then.
Yeah. One of them flew over Kasputin Yar in Russia in 53 on a recon mission. I don't think they flew during the Korean War, so you can call them a Korean bomber, but I don't think they ever got used in the operation. One airplane, here's a World War II airplane I'll bet you didn't know served in Korea. The Grumman, the Navion, which was a civilian airplane that came out, I think, 47. The Army, everybody bought a bunch of them just to use as little liaison airplanes, and they wound up going to Korea. And I think MacArthur got tooled around in one. So the little unarmed Navion was where the shooting was at. They might have been used as spotter.
Was there anything they didn't fly during that time?
Really. But the Grumman Avenger. Now, it was no longer being used as
an Avenger in
Korea?
Korea?
What they did was the Navy used them as hacks, as transports, cargo. Because they still, even though they weren't using them as torpedo bombers anymore, or even as combat aircraft, but they had a bunch of them, and they had a lot of void space inside. So they were like,
they're big inside.
Yeah, they're big. So they just used them for just as hacks, move people around, move a little bit of light equipment around. And I've seen pictures of them on the Ford battlefield airfields, tucked off in the corner, waiting to pick some people up and take them out. Now, an airplane that actually did go shooty, bang, bang during the war was the T-6. What used to be the AT-6, the Advanced Trainer, the Texan. In the Navy, it was the SNJ. They called them mosquitoes, and they used them for forward observation. They called in artillery strikes. They did carry a machine gun synchronized to the prop, and they did carry marker bombs and small bombs, and they actually flew some combat missions. So the Texan is a legitimate warbird. And a couple of countries used them, if I'm not mistaken. I know we used them, and I forget who else used them, but it might have been the Brits or the Canadians or somebody. But the humble advanced trainer really got in the thick of things too. And it was one of the first aircraft of the Republic of Korea Air Force.
Celebrating Vintage Kits says the TBF, I think, was still used as an ASW on carriers.
Yeah,
still during Korea.
That one did not, but that one never went landside in Korea. But he's right; they were used because they were big enough, and they were. You look at them; they were highly modified. I mean, they were way different. They had that big blister on the belly, and it was good because they had that long landing gear. Another airplane
Chris Swan says, "Wait for it. We're going to get the Clint Eastwood story."
Nah, I'm not going to bore you with that.
Okay.
But Eastwood went down and went off the coast of California. He swam to shore. He was a swimming instructor. So anyway, there you got the story. The Albatross, the SA-16, HU-16, depending on which service. A lot of countries use this for a very long time. Now, it was primarily, of course, a rescue aircraft, but it did get where the shooting was at from time to time. They made a movie with Yul Brynner about the pararescue, where he's the pararescue jumper and Richard Widmark. And Richard Widmark doesn't want to land the plane.
And George Chakiris.
Oh, you know the movie?
Yeah. Flight from Aisha.
Flight from Aisha, yeah. But kind of.
Steve Mercer says people always get the post-war markings wrong on Godzilla.
And I always liked the old Albatross.
Are we going to cover helicopters during the Korean War II?
They're down the way. Now, transports.
Ken, don't rush it.
Just curious.
Transport, we have to. It's kind of the helicopter war. Usual transports, C-47s, C-54s, but it also introduced the debut of the C-124 by Douglas, old Shaky, the Globemaster II, and the C-119, the flying boxcar. So they made their debuts in the Korean War. In the movie Battle Hymn, it's C-119s that pick up all the kids in Operation Kitty Car. But in reality, I think it was C-54s. But, who cares? That's a technical thing. The basic story's correct. Look, when you get an active duty 4-star general to do the introduction of the movie for you, you got something right. It was, I think, Earl Partridge that does it. Now, you were asking about the helicopter. Not a lot to cover here. It was cargo planes.
The Globemaster kit looks interesting.
Yeah, it does. I remember. I'm old enough. I remember when the Savannah, the Georgia Air National Guard in Savannah, the outfit still flew those things. That would have been about.
They dropped the blob in the Arctic at the end of the movie with.
Let me think. I was in the 6th grade. 6th grade? Yeah, 6th grade.
I built a mini bar in my 72nd Albatross.
Would have been 1972 or 1971. And I remember we went to the Savannah airport in Mr. Morrow's Bonanza. And I looked out and saw a bunch of those things. What are they? He goes, those are, Air National Guard. And they were so freaking big. Okay, Ken, to answer your question. First, that is not an Army helicopter. That is an Air Force helicopter. It has several designations. The Navy also used them. You saw the Navy version in the bridges at Toko Ri. So the HOS or the R5 or the S-51, take your pick. My God, people, settle on a nomenclature. But the Dragonfly, and apparently it was a real handful to fly. Mickey Rooney had his hands full, him and Earl Holliman. And I'll never forgive the North Koreans for killing Mickey Rooney and Earl Holliman. But again, it was a working helicopter, and it did its job. Of course, the famous mass chopper, the H-13, the Bell 47, basically. One way you can tell an early Army model at a glance over the later civilian models, if you look behind the rotor mast, you will see the fuel tank up on top of the frame. It is a horizontal tank, right? The later civilian models had the big blister tanks, one on each side up top. So if you see that flat tank, then you're probably looking at an early Army model, one of the early ones. And the Army used this helicopter forever. And when they were done beating the crap out of them in the field, they made trainers out of them. Earliest ones had wooden blades on them, but they didn't last very long, so they had to get away from that. And that helicopter, of course, it depends on which model, but the ones they had, like in MASH, the early models, those things are a handful to fly. I don't think anything was auto-governed on them. They only had like a Franklin engine with like 175 horsepower. You were real busy twisting the throttle, pulling the collective, keeping everything synced up, getting the pedal in for the anti-torque rotor. I mean, you had to, that took some practice. Some of those guys got really, really, really good at it, though. And you're flying with everything exposed in a plexiglass bubble on the battlefield. No one ever called one of those guys a coward. Then, of course, the famous H-19, the big Sikorsky. This is the helicopter that really revolutionized the Army. And I think to an extent the Marines. Because this one, with the ability to carry a squad of troops inside, or almost a full squad of troops inside, and you could put the wounded inside as a medevac chopper where a medic could tend to them. You couldn't do that in the other ones because they're out on the skids. This helicopter really made helicopter operations far more viable. The only danger that this helicopter had, that you really had to watch out for, was whatever you do, you never fly it in front of Godzilla. I remember.
The other interesting thing about this helicopter too is the engine was a turbine engine in the nose.
No.
Disc.
Ken. The later modifications, the S-55Ts, those had Pratt & Whitney radials up front. I don't know if they're Pratt & Whitney, but those had piston engines. That's why it's got the big round nose. That's a radial engine in the nose.
Okay.
In fact, I didn't put the artwork up here. I should have. One of the box arts from Revell shows it with the things open and the radial engine.
Yep, that was the original kit.
Yes. Then, Ken...
They got a lot of kits out of that because they did the rescue one you're showing there with the floats.
Yep.
And then they brought it back in orange.
Yep.
You know, they got a lot of mileage out of that.
Sure, they did it as the Arctic one. They did it as the Navy rescue with the floats. They did it as the Army with the wheels. Now, Ken, you're right. Later on after the war, the Army, I don't think, ever operated a turbine version. But it was a natural fit to have a turbine added. Okay? Because why not? I mean, it was a perfectly sound helicopter. Very popular. Kermit Weeks got one a while back that they were doing scenic tours down in the Grand Canyon I think that one had, I don't know if that one had the turbine or the piston, but I think that one had the turbine.
Andy Chandler wants to know, did Godzilla see combat in Korea?
He saw combat in Tokyo. I remember watching King Kong versus Godzilla, and the whole time Godzilla's on, you see one of these things trailing him. I'm like, smart guy. And then for no apparent reason, he flies in front of him and gets torched. And I'm like, okay, you know what it is? He failed as a kamikaze pilot. He felt guilty. Because that made absolutely no sense.
Next one says Godzilla prevented Japan from being in the Korean War.
That's right. You know? Now, one World War II airplane that the Navy operated that people forget about, because it did just like recon and any sub patrol, but was the privateer. And it's really hard to find a picture of a privateer in Korean service because they did spook missions, you know, so not a lot of pictures were taken. But the old World War II privateers did see missions in Korea, and mostly intelligence missions, I think. But and you're right. I forgot to mention the Tiger Cat.
James said Ken might be thinking about the pink turbine-powered version in the late 70s or early 80s.
Riptide.
Show.
Riptide.
Riptide. Yeah.
No, that's not what I was saying. The reason I said that is because when I was in Austin, Texas, I forget how many years ago that was, one of the other guys that I was working with and we drove up to Dallas, and there was an aviation sort of museum. Actually, it just looked like a bunch of airplanes out in the middle of a field with a fence around it. But it was open, and they let us go in, and they had one of those helicopters there, and I got the chance to look under the hood, and that's where I saw that big old turbine.
Yeah. So you just saw a late model is all. One that had been modified. I don't know if they ever manufactured them with a turbine or not. But okay, there is the Tiger Cat.
I know Winnebago used one.
This is the monogram kit that I built several times, the Tiger Cat.
Wait, whoa. Remember we were talking about that one time and you thought, that would be awesome to have something like that?
Yeah. Helicopter Winnebago, of course. And they had a company that tried to turn those things into campers. I mean, they did. I saw one of them, but they never sold any that I'm aware of.
They did sell the one that they made, but that was it.
Cool idea, but first off, not that many people know how to fly a helicopter, and they're expensive as a devil to operate. But there is the F-7F Tiger Cat. Now, this is showing it in World War II markings, which it never saw combat in World War II. The whole idea behind that thing, I think, was to kill all kamikazes. It had a that thing was fast. 2 big engines and really sleek. So they put a back seat in it and a radar, and the Marines used them a little bit. They used them in Korea. They were black with the red markings. I don't think they had a lot of success, but that wasn't the airplane's fault. I think it was just the equipment was pretty primitive. They might have bagged a kill or a bombing. Gotten their licks in, but I don't think they were used that long. But a lot of them were, believe it or not, turned into aerial attack for firefighting. I've seen them with the big blister bellies on them. So yeah, I forgot about the Tiger Cat.
Christopher Jordan says he's sending you a pic of the H-19.
Okay. Well, I can get it online easier, but now we're going to move on to land vehicles. A lot of this stuff was left over from World War II. 8-inch howitzer, just one of the standard Army big guns. It was used extensively in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Heck, they still have a variation of that thing today. If it works. And I don't know if they use I know they use these half tracks in World War II. I don't know if they used them with the 40mm gun or not, but they did use them in Korea as an anti-aircraft gun. Since the enemy didn't have much of an air force to attack ground troops with, I think they were primarily used for shooting at the baddies, just, as an anti-ground gun. And a lot of times anti-aircraft guns, like Quad 50s and Vulcans, do a real good job in the anti-infantry and light armor role. Of course, the M36 Jackson. This was, built on a Sherman chassis, but it had the big gun on the big 90mm. And I've never read anything about these things in Korea. I don't know how they fared. It's basically a tank destroyer anti-tank gun, so it is not a tank. Don't try to use it like one. One weapon system that just would not die is the M7 Priest. Basically,
I'll keep that in mind.
It's basically a self-propelled gun. 105 howitzer on a Sherman chassis.
I'll keep that in mind.
What's that?
Not to use it as a tank.
Yeah. The 105 on a Sherman chassis, the Priest, called that because that cupola looks like a pulpit. And they use that thing for, why not? It was simple. It worked. It took the M7 Priest was so good at what it did because it had Sherman reliability with that proven chassis and the proven, 105. So there was really, everything on it was already proven before they put it together. And the Army realized they could move these things around a lot faster than towed artillery because you didn't have to unhinge the gun and everything and unlimber the gun and all that crap. You just carried everything with you. Drive, park, shoot. And although we use much more modern vehicles today, the concept's the same. And of course, the 155 self-propelled, and we still basically use a version of that today, only it's got a turret on it. But these were used a lot in Korea, and the 155 is how the Army says, I really, really hate you. When they bring out the 155, they are not kidding. That thing will raise a house with a shot. So
How far do those shoot?
yeah, I think it's like 20 miles or something. Well, the old one, the new ones, God only knows. That's probably classified. I know that they can do counter battery fire and not have to worry about getting shot back at. The little light tank, the Chaffee, saw a lot of service in Vietnam. Hell, some of those things are still in service, I think, in Paraguay today. Really good little light tank, but man, they could not slug it out with the T-34s. They learned that the hard way. And we got our butts kicked in those things in a couple open battles in Korea and in Vietnam because it was what we had. Or actually, it was what the Vietnamese had. And you know, like you fight with what you got, but they learned real quick, yeah, this is not going to work. We also had Shermans, which although heavier and more robust and had a bigger gun, could put up a better fight with that 76 high velocity. They still were not a match for the the T-55 came by later. They had problems with the T-34s, and we lost a bunch of them that way, which is why we brought the Pershings in. And the Pershing could deal with the T-34 most effectively. Problem is that the Pershings were always dogged by transmission problems because it was just such a heavy tank, and it was still fairly, it was only 6 years old. But the Pershing, there was a Marine lieutenant running a platoon of Pershings. He knocked out a T-34 easily. The tank didn't stop because his round went all the way through it. And the tank was able to, so he hit it a second time and it stopped it. Another T-34 tried to use the leading T-34 as cover. He put a round through one T-34 and took out the one behind it.
That's innovation.
Yeah. The Pershing was a Tiger tank of Korea. But it had its problems, and the Russians were coming up with new equipment, and we knew it. So we decided it was time to upgrade. So they came out with the Patton, the M46, which was basically an upgraded Pershing. But even that, they realized that although it could deal with what was in Korea, they knew it was going to be outclassed fairly soon. So they came up with the M47 with the rounded turret. The M47 Patton is, I think, the only Patton tank to never see any combat anywhere. It got to Korea too late. It was developed during the Korean War, but it got there too late for the fighting. And we never used it. The Israelis might have, but I don't think we ever did. But I think the Israelis actually got the later models. But the Russians were still using their trusty dusty T-34-85s, and they were doing fine with them until the Pershing showed up. But, you know, it's still tank battle, who sees who first. If that T-34-85 got the first shot in, you know, saw you first, you know, that was a very capable gun on that thing. But the thing was mechanically enormous improvement over the early ones in World War II. Far easier to operate and much more mechanically reliable. Although we still had plenty of Willis Jeeps left over from World War II, the military had gone to the M36, which was basically the CJ5. So those were around in Korea. And another vehicle from World War II that gets forgotten about a lot were the little M8 carriers, the ammo carriers. You know, the support vehicles are important. They could tow the howitzers and everything. You know, it worked. We had them. And
Hey, that Jeep that you had, did that serve in Korea?
no, mine was a Willis MB. It was a 1943. It was a Navy or Marine Corps Jeep. So I seriously doubt. I mean, it might have been in service in Korea. It's possible, but it was around. It was made in 43, so mine was around. But a lot of World War II Jeeps were used again in Korea, so that's distinctly possible.
I thought yours was post-war.
No. That was a. The way to tell a post-war Jeep at a glance, the spare tires on the side, it has a tailgate, and it has a gas cap sticking out the left side. You don't have to move the seat. Now, there was a little toy that they were playing with at the end of World War II called the Tarzan, not Tarzan, Tarzan. It's a combination of Tallboy and Liaison, I think, which was the name for the winged bomb that was smaller. And so this was basically the British, I think, was it 12,000 pound Tallboy? Was that it? With controllable fins so he could fly it to the target. And they knocked out like a half dozen bridges with those things. But apparently they lost a B-29 when one of them wouldn't release. And so they got away from it. But I couldn't find the picture, but I actually have a photo somewhere of me when I'm in high school sitting on one at the Army Museum at Fort Rucker doing my best Dr. Strangelove impression. But the Tarzan, it's the kind of system that people don't think about, but if you were guarding one of those bridges, you sure as heck remember it. So that covered most of the weapon systems and kit models of Korea. And, of course, a lot of them are World War II kits, but because we used a lot of World War II hardware. And speaking
Were
of
there
World War
any
II,
anti-aircraft missile systems in Korea?
no. That came by later. Heck, Ken, they didn't even have Sidewinders yet.
Okay.
Well, the missile technology was all in development at that time. And, in fact, Korea was probably the last of the really guns-only wars, conflicts. 80th anniversary of Iwo Jima. So we wanted to remember that. And the only thing I could find, although I understand there might be some other kits, is that Eshi made the Inferno Island, the Iwo Jima flag raising kit. And a Japanese company that I couldn't get the name on makes these 1 to 700 scale landing LSTs that they call the Iwo Jima set. But anyway.
Oh yeah, Bill Campbell said, what about ships?
Didn't have enough time to get into it. Pretty much most of the ships we used, since he brought that up, you know what? Since he brought that up. Following World War II, the Navy was largely mothballed, and I mean largely, to the fact that when Korea broke out, we didn't even have enough of a Navy to blockade the island, or the peninsula. So the Navy had to start taking stuff out of mothballs. Well, most of the naval assets, except for the modified carriers, well, a lot of the carriers also, were made during or after World War II. They were, of course, Essex class by then, but they were still straight decks. And pretty much most of the Korean War stuff was, including the submarine. There's a movie with William Holden and William Bendix, where Holden is a executive officer of a submarine in World War II, has to leave his skipper behind to save the boat, for which the chief petty officer never forgives him, thinks he's a coward. And then he gets called up in Korea, and they have to bring his old boat out of mothballs. And they literally have to, and he gets the same chief. Anyway,
Oh, I've got a couple of people saying, what about the Centurion tank?
didn't I cover that in the armor? Because I have a picture of one. I thought I put it in there. I have the Centurion right here. Yes, the British. The British did have the Centurion, and it did. In my understanding, did quite well in Korea. It had a very capable gun and very, very solid armor. A lot of people say the Centurion was probably the best tank. Arguably,
That's what Brian Knapp says.
Yeah, the Chieftain, Nick Moran, thinks the Centurion's probably the best tank until, like the Abrams. It's probably why the British used it for so long. But apparently it had, it was well balanced, good gun, good armor, good mobility, just good everything. Relatively easy to keep running. Extremely well respected tank. And,
Good targeting systems.
I'd imagine. But when he did his top 5, I think Centurion was his favorite. And the British had really learned their lesson the hard way from the Germans. So the lessons were not lost on Armor Branch.
Did you show a Bearcat?
No, I don't think they actually served in Korea.
Oh.
Bearcat had a very
Just
short
like
service life.
Emily was asking about that.
Well, my understanding is that the French used them extensively in Indochina. But I don't. Let me check real quick. Yeah, it came out in 44. Was operational by May of 45, but the war was over before it saw service. The wingtips were the wingtips, snap off wingtips were not working as expected. It was designed for the wingtips to come off in high G. Post-war, the FAA became a Navy Marine Q-40, includes 4 squadrons. You often mentioned the best built outperform early. It could outperform early jets. A very aerobatic. Blue Angels used it. I think it was their second airplane. First it was the Hellcats, I think.
Celebrating says no Bearcats in Korea.
The Blue Angels flew the Bearcat until the team was disbanded in 50 for the Korean War and pressed into operational combat. The Panther and the Banshee had replaced the Bearcat. So, but the French used them. And one airplane, oh shoot, there is an airplane I forgot to put in here that saw extensive service in Korea, and that's a Sky Raider. I'm sorry, guys.
Garfield says that Stutz Bearcat definitely did not see action in Korea.
Stutz Bearcat, no.
Oh, Dale says you need a separate show for naval.
Yeah, I can't cover. You just don't have time to cover everything. But again, the Sky Raider, you see it in the bridges of Toko-Ri trying to save William Holden and Mickey Rooney. They just. But I could play another airplane at World War II that.
Well, JM says there were a lot more Corsairs available than Bearcats when Korea broke out.
Yeah, and the thing is that the Bearcat was a fighter. The Corsair had been relegated to being a bomber. So, that was that's one reason the Corsairs were being used in Korea, because they were using the ground attack mission. And let's see.
Dragons Marine says so many surplus Corsairs.
Yep. Okay, here's a real crappy image that I just threw up real quick, but 86 Sky Raider, and but the sorry about forgetting the Sky Raider. I've got 2 on the shelf already done and 3 in the stash. You'd think I'd remember that one, but the Sky Raider.
The shelf must be nervous.
What?
The 2 on the shelf must be nervous.
Paul Adams says this is about the only live stream ever that stayed on topic for the whole 2 hours.
We still got 6 minutes.
Well, that wraps up my coverage of the Korean War stuff, and it is pretty well represented. But when people think Korean War, they mostly think jets. But
The crowd wants to know, was Godzilla in Korea?
not to my knowledge,
we covered
but
that already.
Godzilla's wherever he wants to be. Oh, there is one more thing. I got my Gorilla Glue for dealing with that photo etch on the F-51. I got myself some spray-on fabric glue so that when I do the T-34, after I done flat whitening it, squirt a little of this on and shake some talcum powder on it and then let it dry, shake it off, clean up, and that should put some nice snow texture on it. I will practice on something else first, don't worry. But you guys know Joann's is going out of business, so they got really good discounts, so I picked up a whole bunch of plaques for making dioramas. Got a couple of round ones and a couple of squarish ones. So,
It just scrolled up, but somebody said there were P-38s in Korea?
they were flown by the Chinese, the nationalist Chinese flew P-38s, I think, out of Formosa or Taiwan. I don't know if they were in Korea, but they were flying over China, and I think some MiG shot one of them down. So they probably the F-5 recon version most likely, but I don't know of any P-38s being used in Korea. But
I didn't think so.
yeah, the Air Force certainly wouldn't have. They didn't have any in inventory at that point. The Mustangs are still around because they had so many of them. They were so good. Sky Raider was still around because nothing else could do what it did. The Navy still had, the Marines still had the Corsair because it was a good ground attack aircraft. Navy was still using the Privateer because it had the range and everything. I mean, these were all interim projects. Although the Navy was working on the Neptune and later the Mercator, which had jet engines and piston engines, or Mercator, however you say that.
Craig says, there were 38s in Korea. P-38 can openers. Ha ha ha.
Oh. And, but this equipment has a way of popping up all over the war, all over the world, in the late 40s with Israel, the Israelis are flying Messerschmitts and the Egyptians are flying Spitfires. And so it's like, wow, that's a messed up world. But,
Celebrating vintage model kits. Some Joannes do, but hardly any left.
What's that?
Celebrating vintage model kits was wanting to know, does Joanne have models?
No, they
on
don't.
The store.
No, I have never seen any at Joanne's. But, the Hiller H-23. There's a helicopter I forgot. That's right. And they were also used in Vietnam. In fact, that's called the Raven. Copy. Go here real quick.
Seafires?
I don't know if Seafires are still being used.
I didn't know. I never heard of a Seafire.
It's a Naval Spitfire. It was not a project that worked out very well because it just didn't have the undercarriage for it. Again, an interim, aircraft to because they needed something, and
wow.
Oh, I forgot the
impressive.
Piasecki Hup. I think it may have been around by then.
Your knowledge of aviation still impresses me.
Oh, thank you. Okay, here's a Raven. A little H-23, copy image. 6, save. Let me just get this up here real quick.
Vampires?
I don't know if the Vampires were in Korea. I know the Meteors were.
Well, boys and girls, the hands of time have come up on 9 o'clock.
All right, one more picture.
Christopher says Sea Furies were used.
Sea Furies were used, yeah.
Oh, we covered that earlier.
Okay, here it is. No, that's the H-13. Okay, didn't I just download this thing?
Well, the way you described the Sea Fury, it sounded like it was just a failed idea.
Oh, hold on. What, the Sea Fury?
Yeah, that's the impression I got from the way you described it.
The Sea Fury? That's a great airplane. It's a world beater for its time. Save as Raven. I assume I don't know for a fact that these were in Korea. I assume they were. Okay. Okay.
Onto Mothra.
Okay, that's the Raven, the Hiller. You guys will see it here in a few seconds. The OH-23 Raven. Okay. The Raven is the helicopter that the pilot was flying who stopped Lieutenant Calley and his men at My Lai.
May Lai.
And manufactured in 48. It served in the Korean War with the UN forces and in Vietnam. So yes, it did. So there's one I overlooked.
Boy, that's like being a flying target.
Really. But everyone who's flown them says they're really good little helicopters. I don't know how they stack up against the Bell 47, but they seem to be pretty well thought of. And never flown one, so I don't know. Well, okay, guys, we stayed on target. And I want to thank everyone for coming out. Again, I want to say hello to Steve Jarvis. I hope you and your grandkids are enjoying the show. Andy, I'm glad we got to cover Iwo Jima. Emily, if you and Ian and your mom are watching, hi. That's it. That's a wrap, as they say. I can hear dinner being made. My spider, I'm getting this spider tingle that dinner's being made. So
More like your stomach. Come on, the spider tingle.
you take the spider tingle where it comes, you know?
It's the rumbly in your tumbly.
The rumbly in my tumbly. All right,
This
guys.
spider tingle is his tummy.
Hey, I ain't knocking it. All right, guys, if you want to say your nighty nights, and we'll sign off for the evening.
Go ahead, Ken.
Maxton sends food from 100 yards away.
100 miles away.
Thanks, guys, for showing up. Yes, I think we set a new world's record here. One topic for the whole night. It was a lot of fun, and enjoyed reading your comments. I learned a few things. So thanks for joining us.
Well, guys, thanks for coming and having another enjoyable evening with our host. Hopefully next time we'll be able to make up for this and go off topic multiple times.
Count on it.
But I want to thank all of you for coming here again, and we look forward to doing this again for you next week.
That's right. We have a reputation to maintain. By the way, hit the like button too, please, on your way out.
Didn't think about that.
And send checks.
That's right.
Checks,
I got to
checks
send
are
you.
important too.
I got to send you a check for those 2 shuttlecraft. All right, guys. Well, take care of yourselves. Hopefully, we will see you next weekend. Same bat time, same bat channel. And as always, model on.
Now listen, all you airmen, young and old, to the tales of fighter pilots, young and bold, with their fighters painted yellow, leaping off the contact mellow in the crisp Korean air, so blue and cold. It was dive bomb Olsen, and you stopped the Reds. 8 1,000-pounders loaded instant heads. 4 birds lined up on the runway. Wish I'd gone to church on Sunday. Hope we catch those lousy commies in their beds. 20,000 over Pyongyang, all northwest. Gas mask flight about to face the acid test. Till at last the Yalu River, which makes my liver quiver, with flak guns lined up 24 abreast. Dust clouds roll up from Antung across the way. 20 swept-winged Chinese warbirds out to play. 37s, 23s, all lit up like Christmas trees. Salvo off the tip tanks, leaping to the fray. Kempo Tower clears the pattern with great haste. 20 victory rolls our pilots do with grace. It was thrilling, it was hairy, near that privileged sanctuary. Singman-Rhee will soon be boss of this whole place. Kempo Tower, this is Gas Mask Willie 4. I am heading home, I'm through with this damn war. I am flying on the K2, heading 150 for Taegu, 'cause they're sending back to Moscow for some more. Up over the target and flat on my back, alone and scared shitless, surrounded by flak. There's MiGs on my ass and my burner won't light. Got hung bombs and rockets, but I'll stay and fight. Does anybody read Fireball? I'm bingo for crying out loud. Please keep me out of the weather. I'm no good at flying in clouds. I came here from Seymour 13 months ago. Why MPC did this to me, I don't know. I came in the Air Force 'cause I want to fly. Now I want my mama, I don't want to die. Does anybody read Fireball? The sun's almost down out of sight. GCA, can you hear me? I'm no good at flying at night. Last time I got shot at was 72. My flight leader always told me what to do. But combat is different now, here's how it's done. It's 1v1, v1, v1, v1. Does anybody read Fireball? The airlines are hiring, I hear. Guess I'll take United's offer, a brave DC-10 engineer.
Well, grab your gun and grab your gear. We're on the double, march to the rear. We're moving on. We're moving on. MacArthur's men move back again. We're moving on. Old Singletary was setting his soul, saying, "Come on, boys, we gotta bury our gold." We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on to old Chung Shon. We're moving on. Well, we gave him shot and we gave him shell and we drove him north of Parallel. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're on the run to hell and gone. We're moving on. Holy smoke, they're coming down the pass, spraying a burp gun right at my ass. I'm moving on. I'm moving on. This little GI is flying high. I'm moving on. Hey, here comes Joe Son down the track. GI baby strapped on her back. She's moving on. She's moving on. She's looking for Papa Son. We are moving on. What's the matter? You mad at me? All 'cause I give you VD. We're moving on. We're moving on. Her little honey bucket in the middle of the road. She's moving on. So when you hear the patter of a tiny feet, that's the U.S. Army in a full retreat. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're burning gas. We're hauling ass. We're moving on.
on the station.